Ready? You got your words. You've been working hard, huh? Today I have another question for you. Everybody take a piece of paper and a pen. I have extra here. Pen here, if anybody needs. And there you go, some extra paper. Okay. Okay, 3 questions. See, essay question. Write. Give you a few minutes to write. And the questions are on the board. Write something. Tell me what you know about the sages, what you know about the Mishnah, and what you know about the Midrash. Okay, so just take a piece of paper. Anybody need a pen? I have one.
General?
Whatever you know, in general, from what we studied, from what you can tell me, what you remember.
Period of sages, anything.
Sure, anything and everything that you would like to share with me. Who they were, when they lived, what they wrote, what they did. Maybe you know something about their authority. Who knows? Whatever. We covered yesterday in class. Again, there are 2 books. One book is called the Book of Tanakh, the Bible, the Holy Bible, the Jewish Bible. Only what is called by some people the Old Testament. Don't get confused.
The only testament.
The only Testament, not the New Testament, right there. The only Testament. Very good. The book of the Holy Book, very holy book of Judaism. Who wrote the Tanakh? Well, it's a composition. It's a composite, right? Some Moshe, some prophets, right? But primarily, we could say the prophets. Prophets. Moshe was the head of the prophets, but in some way, we believe that all the Tanakh is written the Ruach HaKodesh, with the Holy Spirit. So let's just say the prophets, the biblical prophets, wrote the Tanakh. The other book that is on the board is called the Talmud. I'll leave the Midrash aside for a minute. Who wrote the Talmud?
Rabbi.
Nah, correct, but it's more of a collection. He couldn't write all of the Talmud. They say that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi compiled the Mishnah, which is part of the Talmud. Then the Gemara includes not just a commentary, but more discussions of further advances of the ideas discussed in the Mishnah. So, who wrote the Talmud, essentially? I'm looking for one word. Right, exactly. So if we have the prophets wrote the Tanakh, we have the sages, or Chazal, who wrote the Talmud. That's 2 major books of Judaism. Clear? Now,
Talmud and Tanakh.
Talmud and Tanakh, right? Tanakh and Talmud. Tanakh first, Talmud later. You could see there's a couple hundreds of years between them. The Tanakh was finished. You have it on your chart here, right? This is the Tanakh.
Yeah.
And it started over here with Moshe and the prophets. And even in the Second Temple time, there was still some Tanakh being written. The scribes, the priests, they were writing Tanakh. So the Tanakh is for the first 3 sections, right? It was canonized in the Second Temple era. But then there's another whole book called the Talmud, and that's not by the prophets. There's no more prophecy. What are we left with? Sages. Hashem gave special guidance to the sages. They weren't prophets, but they were very, very holy, and very, very smart, and very, very connected to the Jewish tradition. The most important link in the chain of Jewish tradition were the sages. And their works were all collected in a book called the Talmud. 2 books, good. So who wrote the Tanakh? Prophets. Who wrote the Talmud? Sages. Okay, Nevi'im and Chachamim. Nevi'im and Chachamim. Hananel, I don't want you to miss out. So who wrote the Tanakh? Prophets. In Hebrew? Nevi'im. And who wrote the Talmud? The sages. And in Hebrew that's Chachamim or Chazal? Chachamim or Chazal. You have to be pushing the top while you push that in. That's what he's telling you. He knows. Okay. Okay. What's the difference between prophets and sages? Different period. What else?
Prophets directly goes to Hashem, like the message from Hashem.
Direct a message from Hashem. And the sages?
They have prophecy, but
they have prophecy, and they don't have prophecy. The sages don't have prophecy. They have. They're very pious and very holy, and very intellectually smart, and they have lots of traditions, but they don't have this special mode of communication with Hashem called prophecy. At least not on the level that the prophets did. So they have a different name. They're called the sages, and so it's a different mode, it's a whole different way of thinking, the way of passing on the tradition. No longer can you, like, what do we have in this week's parsha? Moshe says, "Wait a minute, I need to talk to God. He'll tell me what to do." Sages can't do that as much like Moshe can. Even the prophets, they didn't always get prophecy on demand. What's that called? You have VOD. What's VOD, right? You click video on demand. So Moshe could have POD, right? Prophecy on demand. But the other prophets, they had prophecy, but it was up to Hashem when he wanted to talk to them, and it was not on demand. Okay, anyways. Now the sages, tell me, what do we usually call? This is where it's confusing, because these are 2 types of books, right? 2 books. Tanakh, it's actually a collection of books. The Talmud is also a collection of books. What do we usually call this book, and what do we usually call that book? This term. You might remember if you look at the number 1 on yesterday, on the list we talk about. We call this the written Torah, and we call this the oral Torah. It's not true. Why is it not true? Because they're both books. How could it be the oral Torah if it's a book? It's not oral, it's written. They're both written. And also, as I explained to you, I think a couple weeks ago, the Torah and the prophets, for many, many years, were passed down orally. Not everybody had paper and pen. Like nowadays, we have paper as much as you want. It's almost free. To write, you had to be a scribe and parchment, and not everybody knew how to write in the First Temple era. In the Second Temple era also, there were scribes. They were very special scribes who could do it. So there was a lot of the Tanakh was also oral at first. And the Talmud gets written down. So it's oral Torah, it's getting written down. So this division between the written Torah and the oral Torah is a little bit tricky, because the oral Torah, it didn't start with the sages. The oral Torah also goes back to Moshe. And the writing down of the Torah didn't stop after the Tanakh, because the Talmud gets written down. So they're both written and they're both oral. Is that clear? What that says on the chart, just look at your chart for a second. What does it say over here? It says the written and the oral Torah were transmitted. And then in the middle section it says the oral Torah was written down and developed. See that at the bottom of your chart? The written Torah was written down for the first time and developed by the sages. Not by the prophets, by the sages. Different type of study. See where it says here? Oral Torah written down. Where does the oral Torah start? Sinai, all the way back. 1,500 years before it gets written down. There was oral Torah. The Tanakh essentially is also oral Torah until it gets written down. It got written down earlier. It's the first thing that got written down.
It's not the old books. First, the oral.
That's right. I think so. In the ancient world, every book took a while till it came into book form.
Yeah. So
I mentioned to you a number of times.
First is here.
First it's here, that's right. What does it say in the Torah? V'daber Hashem el Moshe lemor. God spoke to Moshe saying. And then it gets written down.
Yeah.
But first is oral. So, but of course, we call this the written Torah, and we call this the oral Torah. But it's a book. But it's called the Book of the Oral Torah. It's the first time that the oral Torah gets written down. Before that, you were not allowed to write down the oral Torah. It was supposed to be oral. Yeah.
So this oral Torah, it gets developed in Talmud
Yes.
Josh.
Yes. By the sages. Yes.
Involve this inspired innovation, is it?
Yes. Yes. That's the developing is the inspired innovation. Excellent. Very good. Stephen, I want to tell you that your question yesterday was so valuable to me. And I thank you so much for it because I realized, and also Hananel today, I realized that when we speak English and we say, this comes from the sages, it's meaningless. A sage just means a wise man. But when we're speaking Jewish and we say sages, it means the rabbis who lived, the teachers of Torah who lived from 0 to 500. Those sages that are called Chachamim or Chazal, and only those sages. Rabbi Guna is a sage. He's not one of Chazal. He lives 2,000 years later. The time period is significant for who we deem a sage. Okay, Hananel, you got that? So a sage, it does, in English, it just means a wise man. And also in Hebrew, a chacham, you could be chacham. Shmuel, you look pretty chacham to me. You're pretty smart. So, you cannot be one of the chachamim. The chachamim, otherwise known as Chazal, only that period where they had, as Stephen said, they were involved in developing the Torah with a lot of transmitted tradition, but also that gets written down, but also a lot of innovation, a lot of deriving. What did we say? What's the word for deriving yesterday? The type of reading of the Torah, of teasing out new meanings from the Torah. The Rash, right? There's 13 ways that we do drash. Shatorah nidreshet bahem. Okay, this is only by Chazal. Chazal did drasha in the manner of teasing out new laws from a close reading of the text. Once the Talmud was closed, we don't do that anymore. This type of using the 13 principles of Rabbi Ishmael, the principles of exegesis, it's called, deriving out things from the way the Tanakh is written. We don't have the authority to make new drashot of this kind since the period of the sages was closed. Is that clear? Very good. Very important. Very important. Yes?
It means They don't have names?
So let's get into the details now. So during that period, 500 years,
Yes.
there's a lot of names, a lot of great rabbis. We know all their names. As a matter of fact, I can tell you now, those 500 years, first of all, you can tell me we split it into two very easily. Everybody should know that that period gets split in. There's two types of sages. What are the two types?
No,
The first 200 years. You know it. What are they called?
Tanaim.
Tanaim.
Is the
Tanaim, the authors of the Mishnah, and Amoraim, the authors of the Gemara. I can tell you now, we study their words. We study the Talmud day and night, right?
Yeah.
The Talmud is central book of Judaism. It's about 3,000 pages long in the standard printing that we use. And there might be 200 sages mentioned. I don't remember all of their names, but I do know that among the Tanaim, 5 generations. The first one's Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. The second one is Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. The third one is Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael. The fourth one is Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Shimon. I think I said Rabbi Yossi. And the fifth one is Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. You don't have to know all that now. Just showing you that if you study their works, we get to know the rabbis. You ask me, what do they have names? Sure, there's lots of names. Hundreds of rabbis are mentioned in the book of the Mishnah. Now we'll go on. After year 200, there's, what am I looking at now? The names of the Amoraim. The next stage is the Amoraim. So the first stage we have Rav and Shmuel in Babylon, and here we have two. When it comes to the Amoraim, we have the tradition, the Amoraim of Eretz Yisrael. The Tanaim are all in Eretz Yisrael. The Amoraim we have from Eretz Yisrael and from Bavel. In Eretz Yisrael we have Levi and Chia, and the second generation we have Rabbi Yochanan, and then we have Rabbi Yamin, Rabbi Yassi. And in Bavel, 5 generations of Amoraim. Because I study so much Talmud, you have to become familiar with who's who. You have a discussion, you have to know, is he talking to him directly? Maybe it's 100 years later. There's 300 years, even more. Talmud Bavli goes on to year 600. This is a rough estimate. So there's hundreds of years of sages of Tanaim and hundreds of years of sages of Amoraim. All of them, we call them Chachamim, Chazal, the authors of the Talmud. Is that clear? And I just gave you 2 names on the page, but there's so many more names.
this is I was thinking
Yeah.
that I want to the names.
You want to know their names? Okay. Well, I just listed some. I could make you a list.
Yeah, but
In order of when they lived in their generations. There's 5, 6, some people say even 7 generations of Amoraim. Of, master to student, sometimes father, son, but usually student, and then he becomes the rabbi, and then he has students, and then he has students. It's a chain of tradition. There were students and rabbis for 500 years involved in this TT and II. What's TT? Transmitted tradition. You have it on this page. All right? TT, on top of number 2, the transmitted tradition, the Mesorah, and inspired innovation, Chidush. Wow, what a period of history. So when people say, I'm going to ask you a question now. It's a little nice, for a date, for your next date. It's a good question to discuss. If you could go back in a time machine to any time in history and interview a Jewish leader, who would you like to speak to? You go to Moshe Rabbeinu. Good.
Leo.
Eliyahu, good. I imagine most of you are going to tell me biblical characters because you learned about them a lot and you study them. But the more you study in yeshiva and the more you get familiar with Judaism and the Jewish tradition, you'll realize how central the Talmud is and the sages were. And so some people will say, I would love to meet Rabbi Akiva. Some people say, I would love to meet Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. I would love to have a cup of coffee with Abaye and Rava, Shmuel and Rav, the great Amoraim. You get to know more people. There's so much of the tradition to learn from them. They were the greatest leaders. There's the prophets and sages. Is that clear? Yeah? Israel, you with me? You got it? Prophets and sages. Both amazing, very important. The most important foundation of the Jewish tradition. These two books in two different periods of a very different nature also. The Bible is prophetic literature. And the Talmud is discussions, traditions together with analysis, arguments, laws, stories, history, beliefs. Talmud is an amazing book. And it's central to Judaism because after the Talmud was sealed, these two books become the central books of Judaism till today, 1,500 years later. And if the Talmud Yerushalmi was sealed at year 500, now it's year 2022. It's 1,500 years later. If you want to study Judaism, you have to study Tanakh. That's not enough. Maybe Christians took the Tanakh and said, that's it. But it's such a book that can't really be understood on its own. It's like the written Torah without the oral Torah. You're not getting the full story of what Judaism is till you have the oral tradition. Where are you going to find the oral tradition? I can't hear anything. I can't hear. It's so many years ago. It got written down. A lot of it got written down in the Talmud. So you have to study the Talmud. You want to show me something?
Yeah.
Okay. B'vakasha.
I have 40 generations for oral Torah, but the time period, the generation was not correct.
It was not correct. Now it's correct? Show me what you want to show me. B'vakasha. Okay. So this, yeah.
Hashem give to Moshe,
Oh, look at that. You have a chain of tradition by name from Moshe down to, and then it goes this way? Ah, I see. Yeah. Yafem. Oh, look at that. All the way down to Rav Ashi at the end of the Talmud. You have a chain. Beautiful. From Moshe. That's pretty impressive. How many years? How many years? Look on the page. How many years? If Moshe was at the beginning of the chart, minus 1,500, approximately, the end of the Talmud is year, it's early, 600, but let's say 500. How many years? 2,000 years, you have that. And 2 pages, 3 pages. Hananel. Amazing. Obviously, it's not everybody in 2,000 years, but central figures in this chain of tradition is amazing. It's amazing. Yes, it's a 2,000-year-old tradition. By the time the Talmud is completed, the Talmud is the Jewish version of the Tanakh and the Talmud. As a matter of fact, there's a section of the Talmud that says everybody should divide up their time of study. You're not supposed to study Torah. Talk about, okay, what does that mean you're supposed to study Torah? So one passage in the Talmud says you're supposed to divide your time into three. A third of the time you should study the Tanakh. A third of the time you should study Mishnah. And a third of the time you should study Talmud. And one of the commentators, one of the Rishonim, the Baalei Tosafot, his commentary on the Talmud, he says, wait a minute, we don't do that. Why don't we do what it says in the Talmud? Divide up our study into three parts. Like Machon Meir. Look at the schedule. We should, if we have 10 hours of studies a day, so it should be 3 hours of Tanakh, 3 hours of Mishnah, and 3 hours of Talmud. We don't do that. Okay, we're beginners, we're trying to fill in holes, but go to the greatest scholars in the Beit Midrash. And he asked them, do you study Tanakh for 3 hours a day? Do you study Mishnah for 3 hours a day? Do you study Talmud? Most of them will tell you, if you go to most yeshivot in the world, what's the central book of study? For 8 out of 10 hours, it's not Tanakh. It's the Talmud.
Well, without knowing Tanakh, we can understand
You can open up all the books. They're all open for you. There's no prohibition on anything. And of course, you should study Tanakh. But what I'm asking, why is the custom we study so much Talmud? The Tosfot said, our excuse is that the Talmud is a mixture of everything. It has Gemara, Mishnah, and Tanakh. Every page of Talmud, most pages of Talmud, quote psukim from Tanakh. So we study so much Talmud, it's as if we did a third. But it's been a long debate for hundreds of years. Many people think that's not good enough. If you only study Talmud, you won't really know Tanakh well, and you won't really know Mishnah well. But I think it's true that there's perhaps stages in your career. Young children, usually they learn a lot of Tanakh, and then they get a little older, they learn a lot of Mishnah, and then for the rest of their lives, they just have to review all the time, all the Tanakh and all the Mishnah that they learned, and they can focus on studying the analysis, the Talmud, the rest of it. So Talmud becomes so central because it's sort of a summary of all of Judaism for 2,000 years. Is that clear? Yefé mod. So now, we said something about the sages. Right? What were 3 questions? Tell me what you know about the sages. So what did we say? They were the leaders scholars who lived from 0 to 500 in the land of Israel and in Babylon. They divided up into 2. The first 200 years were called Tanaim. The second part they're called Amoraim. What they were involved with was transmitting the tradition and developing the oral law and writing down the oral law, at least at some point during that 500 years. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the last of the Tanaim, he wrote down for the first time oral law and continued to be studied afterwards and developed. And there were the words of the sages of the Amoraim was written down in the Talmud, in the Gemara. What else do we know about the sages? We know some names of who they were. Bar Kokhba, he was during the period of the Tanaim, he led a rebellion against the Romans, a second rebellion. The first rebellion caused the destruction of the second temple in year 70, right? The Great Revolt led to the destruction in year 70. You have that on your chart? You see that? You're following along? We're focusing on that middle column. Period 4. And despite the destruction, these sages kept on studying, transmitting the oral tradition, developing it with innovations, creating such a central book called the Talmud. Baruch Hashem, Boker Tov, Shalom, Boker Tov. You have no idea what we're studying here. What are the two major books of Judaism? What can you tell the Rav? Tanakh and the Talmud. Very good. And how do you define what's the Tanakh versus what's the Talmud?
It's written in oral law.
The written law, but they're both books. How could it be the oral law?
Later written down.
It was later written down. Amazing.
Write it down.
It was quite problematic.
It's not allowed to write it down, but Rabbi mentioned that sometimes there's like maybe generations will forget about it.
What did King David say about that?
King David? I don't know. What did King David? The words of the teaching. Yeah. Eit lasod Hashem. Very good. Toda rabba. Toda rabba. Hashem.
Is the one Elu? No.
He was quoting something else. Sorry.
Meeting at 12:20 for a few minutes, and then go to Rabbi Go's office. Trying to assemble us after we hear the Rabbi. 12:20. Take it. Leave. Yeah.
Okay. Yafeh. So the sages, we know a little bit about them. They were so active in preserving and developing the Torah despite upheaval under the Roman oppression, right? Till ultimately the Romans were too much and the Jewish people got scattered.
When is Bar Kokhba?
135. And for a couple of years, approximately. That's just one number to remember. You remember 70 and 135, you're good to go. You have 0 to 500, 0 to 200, that's all the numbers you need. You don't need too many details. Yes, Shmuel.
The Amoraim, the writers of the Gemara.
Yes.
Gemara is
discussions based on the Mishnah. Based on the Mishnah. Yeah. So now let's talk about the Mishnah. What were my three questions, sages? Mishnah and Midrash. So we have to talk about the Mishnah and the Midrash. I didn't see much that I liked in your answers about Mishnah and Midrash, which is good, because now I can clarify it, explain it. What's important about Mishnah and Midrash is the same thing that's important about the sages. It's that they were written in this time period. Okay, it's the transmission of the Jewish tradition. It's being put into writing. The first books, perhaps ever written, other than the Tanakh, by the sages, were called Midrash and Mishnah. The Gemara is the latter part of that. After we had the Mishnah, then we have Gemara that is an elaboration on the Mishnah. But the Midrash and the Mishnah are the first books. What's the difference between the Midrash and the Mishnah? Not as much as you would think. Most people think it's content. It's not true. We have legal content. What do we call that? Halakha. And we have non-legal content of history, of beliefs, of stories. That's called Agadah. Both in the Midrash and in the Mishnah, we have both. Halakha and Agadah. I'll put that on the board. So we have Halakha and Agadah. In the Tanakh, there's some legal portions of the Tanakh, and there's parts of the Tanakh which are stories. What's this week's Parsha? Korach. It starts off with a story. The earth swallowed them up. Everybody knows that. But then what happens afterwards? There's the laws of the Levites, and what portions they get from the temple sacrifices and so forth, and from the Jewish people. Those are laws. We have halakha and agadah. mixed in. Got that? And then we have the books here. The Talmud, which is Mishnah plus Gemara. We have mixed in Halacha and Agadah. Also Midrash. We have mixed in Halacha and Agadah. What's the difference then? What's the difference between the Midrash and Mishnah? Exactly. What's the difference? So now I'm going to tell you once and for all. It's not about the topic, because we have legal material and non-legal material. The same topics. They're different organization. They're not different authors. They're both authored by the sages. Right? This is the Talmud. This is what we've been talking about. The central period of the Jewish scholarship is the period of the sages. They wrote the Mishnah and they wrote the Midrash. The same rabbis, the same names. If you open up the books, they have the same names. It's the same rabbis. And they dealt with Halacha and they dealt with Agadah. And their words are collected in two different kinds of books. Midrash kind of book and a Mishnah kind of book. What's the difference between them? The difference is the organization. Here, the organization is the 24 books of the Tanakh. That's the only book of Judaism we had, right? So the Midrash is a collection of the words of the sages, organized as a commentary to the Tanakh. So you have the Midrash on the book of Bereshit, the Midrash on the book of Shemot, the Midrash on Tehillim, the Midrash on Yoshua, the Midrash of Shmuel, right? We have a Midrash on all the books. What does it include? Halacha and Agadah. They all include Halacha and Agadah. That's all we have. Legal material, non-legal material. That's just everything. Jewish tradition. Where's the vessel? Excuse me. May I borrow this? Here's my Jewish tradition. The Word of God from Sinai. I pour it in here.
So hot.
It's hot, passionate, and I pour it in here. It's the same Torah, right? In two different vessels. The words of the sages are in the Midrash and in the Mishnah. What's the difference between them? Well, this one's white and made out of ceramic, and this one's glass. You can look inside, there's even different colors. How is the Mishnah different than the Midrash? Is it the color of the cover of the book? It's not the color of the book. What's the difference? The organization. The organization here was a brand new organizational system called 6 orders. An order is a topic or category. That's the difference. The Mishnah, it's the first time that the traditions were written down, the oral traditions were written down, other than the Tanakh. But it's also the first time we get a new organizational structure of the traditions. Like I said, Korach, you have a story about rebellion, and then you have laws about the Levites. And then what else does it have in the end of the parsha of Korach? There's some other laws. I can't remember now. There's some other laws. Let me just grab a Tanakh and see. We have then we have some laws of The Beit HaMikdash. The laws of Bechor, the laws of the firstborn. So this is a jumble. The laws of the firstborn is not the same thing as the laws of the Levites, and it's not the same thing as the laws of the sacrifices in the temple. And so Rabbi Yehuda Nasi decided to make a new structure. Judah the prince, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. He was a Nasi. Prince is not really a good translation. He was from the chain of royalty. There is, but there was an official position. There were two heads. Something else I could teach you about the sages. During this time period, there were two leaders. It already starts, as you can see before, at the end, there was pairs of leaders. One was the president, the Nasi, and one was the Av Beitim, the head of the high court. That's what the pairs were. And that continued throughout the period of the Tanaim until we have Rabbi Yehuda in the year 200, and he's known as Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi because he was the president. There's a tradition that the presidents had to be from the line of David. So in some way he is a prince, because King David, right? He's descendant of King David. So maybe that's why they translate it as Judah the prince. But the Nasi, a better translation would be the president. Like the president of Israel, there's a president and a prime minister. Right? There's two types of leaders. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi was the leader in year 200, and he innovated not only writing it down for the first time in history, the oral traditions. So he made a new book of Judaism other than the Tanakh. He also structured the book totally differently. No more Bereshit Shmot Vayikra Bamidbar Dvarim, right? Yeshua Shoftim Shmuel Melachim Shayahu Yirmiyahu Yechezkel. You got to know the books of the Tanakh. If you study 3 hours a day, you know. He made up a new structure based on topic. Does anybody know the structure of the Mishnah? And that later stays as the structure of the Talmud, because the Talmud is like a commentary on the Mishnah. So the Talmud, Mishnah plus Gemara, it's all in this 6 orders, categories.
What is Shabbat?
Shabbat is part of... Write them down. It's not on your page. I'm going to tell you right now. Number 1 is Zera'im. Zera'im is the laws of agriculture. It means seeds. Next one is Moed. Moed is festivals. Laws of the festivals. Separate order. Separate... then comes Nashim. Nashim, the laws of women. Marriage, divorce, etc. Then comes another N, Nizikin. Nizikin means damages. Civil law. Kodashim. Who knows all these answers? Who's been saying them? Hananel? Very good. And finally, Tahorot. Tahorot is purity, laws of purity for the temple primarily. Kodashim is the offerings, the holy sacrifices. Going to write offerings in English. And Nizikin, damages. Nashim, women. Moed, festivals. So Shmuel, Shabbat is in Moed, of course. Is agriculture. Laws of agriculture in the land of Israel. These 6 orders, if you notice, there's an easy way to remember them. Someone made an acronym. It spells out Zman Nakat. It's Aramaic. Nakat means to take. Take the time. Zman is time. So take the time to study your Talmud. Take the time. Zman nakat. Zayin, mem, nun, nun, kuf, tet. Zman nakat.
Noel or Moed?
Moed. D.
Moed.
Moed. I apologize for my handwriting. This is the new, improved statement of the Jewish tradition after the Tanakh. Tomorrow I'll give you a proper chart. I have it here somewhere. Let's see if I have enough here.
Is it basically the same material?
Good question. The answer is yes and no. Yes and no. Because it includes the laws of Shabbat. There's psukim about the laws of Shabbat. Those are quoted in the Mishnah, some of them, but there's much material which is not explicit in the Tanakh because it was oral. And so, but it's about Shabbat. So you could say it's the same material but developed, the word I use. Fleshed out.
The Midrash doesn't have that?
Midrash also? Midrash has the same.
The same material.
It's the same material. Midrash is the same material as the Mishnah. Just, it didn't get as popular as the Mishnah. The Mishnah became really, really popular because of the organization, and maybe Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was very good at it. And for whatever reason, it was so popular that it's the foundation of the Talmud, and it's the restatement of Judaism, which even overtakes the centrality of the Tanakh. Is that clear? Still remains the central book, the Tanakh. But, you're going to find a lot more details in the Mishnah than you will in the discussion in Parshat Korach. And so the laws of the Levites, the laws of Bechor, the firstborn, it's here in Seder Kodashim. 6 orders contain 60 books. 63 is our current count, the way we count now. 60 or 63 to be more precise, but so how many books are there in the Tanakh?
24.
24. That's the way we count them. How many books in the Talmud? 63. 24, 63, right?
We learn Talmud here 49 and then Jerusalem here 66.
Imprecise. I'd like to correct that. I have a chart here, but I don't find it right now. I'll have to find it for you. Precisely, so this 6 orders becomes equals 63 Masechet. That's the singular. Masechtot is the plural. Books, essentially books, sections. We talked about 24 books of Tanakh. All of the book of Yoshua, it has chapters within each book has chapters. Same thing here. We have orders as categories, and then we have books. Each book has chapters. So the equivalent of the books of the Tanakh would be the Masechtot. Masechet. Sometimes they use the English word tractate for Masechet. I don't know what the word means, so I just use Masechet. I've studied many tractates, many Masechtot. 63 of them. Now, I want to clarify, what did we say? There's, I'm running out of room over here, so I'm going to make a box over here, okay? I don't want to take off. So if we have Mishnah, we have 63 Masechtot, right? Masechtot, plural. But then we have, on the Mishnah, we have discussions called the Gemara. But what do we say? We have two Gemaras. We have the Gemara of the land of Israel, Eretz Yisrael, and we have the Gemara of Babylon. Both of these discussions of the Mishnah, both of these Gemaras are incomplete. Can you imagine? The greatest book, the central book of Judaism, the Talmud. It's incomplete. Because we only have Gemara in the Babylonian Talmud, we only have Gemara on 37 out of the 63 Masechtot. I think probably that's what you were referring to, Hananel. You said something about 40. The classic count is we have 37 Masechtot of Gemara in the Talmud Bavli. Is that clear? And in the Yerushalmi, I can't remember how many we have. How many out of the 63? I have a chart here, but I can't find it right now. I'll find it for you by tomorrow. I'll give it to you precisely. It's quite instructive, this chart. How come I don't have it? Oh, I do have it. Here it is. And I even have copies for you. See, I did prepare. I just didn't find it on my desk. Here we go. I think I have it here. This is not it. This is not it. This is the books of the Tanakh. This we did already.
They're both incomplete?
Both incomplete. I don't have it after all. No, sorry. It'll have to be tomorrow, I think. No, hang on. Strange. You have it?
Yeah.
That's a good one. Yeah. Do you want to photocopy it maybe for everybody? We have a few minutes. Let me see that. Let me see. Yeah, excellent. So in the number of, but doesn't have the list of how many Masechtot we have. We'll count them. Anyways, why don't you photocopy this for everybody? And I have another chart as well, but how many are we? We need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7, please. But I can tell you this, it's not 63. It's incomplete. It's less than 63. It may be even less than 37. We don't have all of the discussions on all of the 63 Masechtot of Mishnah. What do? Take, for example, Masechet Avot. Have you ever heard of Masechet Avot? Pirkei Avot, otherwise known as. Pirkei Avot is it's one of the 63 Masechtot of the Mishnah. One of the 3 Masechtot of the Mishnah. No Talmud. We have no Gemara on Avot. It's such a central part. One of the most famous parts of the Mishnah is Masechet Avot. There's no Talmud in Bavli, and there's no Talmud Yerushalmi. No Palestinian Talmud, and no Babylonian Talmud. What do? We study the Mishnah without the Talmud. We can see some words of the sages in collections of Midrash, but it's not on, Midrash is on the books of the Tanakh. So we don't have it as a commentary, but we have words of the sages which refer back to Masechet Avot. They're just not collected in a book. We don't have Gemara on Masechet Avot. We have later commentaries, but nothing from the period of the sages. No Amoraic book called Gemara on Masachet Avot.
The 37 and however how many is in the Yerushalmi, are they more practical?
They, much more detailed.
The Avot is more.
It doesn't matter. They both include Halacha and Agadah. All of them include Halacha and Agadah. Don't get confused. So if you count up how many books have a number in the column for Bavli, you'll find that there's 37. But how many are there? I'm going to count now the Yerushalmi. So I have, I'll start from the top. Masechet Brachot. Everybody with me? Start from the top. Masechet Brachot. It's part of Zraim. Zraim is the first section, right? So there is on Brachot, is there Yerushalmi? Is there Yerushalmi? You see a number here? That's the number of pages, right? There's 68 pages, but we're going to count that as one, okay? Because there's one Gemara on Masechet Brachot. Pe'ah, number 2. So we see that all of Seder Zraim, there's 11 Masechtot full of Gemara in the Yerushalmi. And then there's all the way, all of Masechet Moed, there's Gemara, Yerushalmi. So sum total, 23 so far. Nashim, also. We have a complete 30 Masechtot of Yerushalmi. We add go on to the next column, to Nezikin, at the top of the right column, Nezikin, we have almost a complete to number 40, but we don't have on Avot, and we don't have it on Eduyot. So it's 40 minus 2. So we have 38. Okay, Kedoshim, we've got 0. In Taharot, we have only Nida. So how many is it? Instead of 40, we had 38. And then we have to add 1. So it's 39. 39 Masechtot in Gemara of the Palestinian Talmud. That's it. What about all the others? Now look on your chart and you see what's missing. Which sections of the Mishnah were not, we don't have a Gemara written on them. Can you see on the chart? Yeah, where are they? Where are they missing? If you look at Taharot, we don't have Gemara, not in the Bavli and not in the Yerushalmi, except for one Masechet. Masechet Nida. We have both Bavli and Yerushalmi. You see that on the chart? This last whole section. We have very little Gemara. And Kodashim, it should be, it's a mistake. It should be Kodashim, the way it's pronounced. And we have lots in the Bavli, but not in the Yerushalmi. Very interesting. And now look at Zraim. Look at Zraim, the first order. What do we have? Lots of Yerushalmi, but not very much Bavli. We have almost no Bavli on the Seder Zraim. So if you want to study the laws of agriculture, you're going to be studying lots of Talmud Yerushalmi. We just don't have. Now, it's true, the Talmud is very associative. So sometimes in the middle of Masechet Shabbat, all of a sudden there'll be a few pages which discuss the laws of agriculture. So we do have some discussions of those topics in the Talmud Bavli, just not organized in one book as a commentary on the Mishnah. So there are matters which are discussed in other Masechtot as an aside, associatively described. But anyways, all this is Talmud versus Tanakh. The Talmud is a restatement. Midrash has lots of Tanaitic material, but the organization is, as if you want to look up the laws of Shabbat, where would you go? In the Mishnah, you go to Masechet Shabbat. Look at Moed number 12 on your chart. Masechet number 12. Very simple. It's all organized for you by topic. But if you want to look in the Midrash, what did the sages have to say about Shabbat? Find the pasuk in the Torah which speaks about Shabbat. There's a number. In each one of them, you're going to have some comments of the sages. The same sages Same halacha and same agadah. Now I want to clarify one more thing. Are you with me?
Yeah.
The Mishnah, the Talmud, it's a mixture. Halacha and agadah, right? You saw the arrows. They're all mixed in. There is something unique about the Midrash, in that there's actually two sets of Midrash. There's a book called Midrash Halacha, and there's a book called Midrash Agadah. Here we have a little bit of a division. The problem is that they were not very careful at sticking to the rules. In Midrash Halacha, close to 50% is full of Agadah, non-legal material. And in Midrash Agadah, there is at least 10%, maybe even 20% of legal discussions. So it's not a clear division between Midrash Halacha and Agadah. Midrash Agadah is 80-90% Agadah. So that's more clear. It's a useful, that's why people think, if you say the word Midrash, they think you're referring to Midrash Agadah. Midrash Halacha is, maybe only scholars learn it, but it's too much of a mix to be useful. And then we have the Mishnah. So the Mishnah is much more organized and much more developed. And so this area called the words of the sages, it's the same sages. Every word of the sages is like gold. But you ask me, what do I study more? Mishnah or Midrash? You asked 100 students of Torah, what do you study more? Mishnah or Midrash? 99 would say, we study Mishnah much more. Because then we have on the Gemara, which develops it, and we have the discussions, and it's a better system by topic. The Midrash gets slightly less, a lot less learned. For two reasons. One is the organization system is kind of old. And number two is this mixture of Halacha and Agadah. And primarily, so we have very few books we only have Midrash Halacha on, there's only four books. Only 4. Not 24. We have Midrash Halacha on only 4 books. Not 24. And so it's a really small sort of niche market. Midrash Hagadah we have more. We have on all 24 books probably. Midrash Hagadah. So that's why when people say Midrash, they think it means stories or beliefs or history, which is true, but it's not really what the word means. The words, it's the words of the sages that are organized by the 24 books. The organization is by the 24 books of the Tanakh. I think now we're ready. Now we understand what Midrash is, we understand what Mishnah is, we understand what Gemara is, somewhat. Next thing we do is we have to start studying. Mishnah, Midrash, Midrash Halacha, Midrash Haggadah, Gemara. I happen to have some right here for us to study. These pages I just saw, so that I have for sure.
What does it mean that Mishnah doesn't have Haggadah, or?
The Mishnah has Haggadah in it too, like I said, from the beginning. Halacha and Haggadah are a mixture in the Mishnah. For example, Pirkei Avot, Masechet Avot. What number is that on your chart? Number 39. You see number 39? It's in the Zikin over here. 39, it's a little bit hard to read. Is mostly Haggadah. But it's in the Mishnah. But the other Masechtot are more halacha. It is true that the other Mishnah is heavily weighted towards halacha. The Talmud, the Gemara, not so heavily weighted. Gemara, even though the structure is mostly halachic, these 63 Masechtot, when they're discussing it, the rabbis bring in lots and lots of Agadah, even in their discussion of halachic issues. The division between halacha and Agadah is something that's a little bit misleading. Because Agadah feeds into halacha, and halacha feeds into Agadah. That division between legal and non-legal, sometimes they're a little artificial. But yes, what did you want to ask?
I just wanted to ask a question. What is called Mishnayot?
What are called Mishnayot?
It's not in the chart, but I hear about it.
Mishnah, singular. Mishnayot, plural. That's it. That's right. Shisha Sidrei. This is Seder. Orders is Sidrei. It's a translation of Seder. Seder is a singular, and Sedarim is plural. Or if you say it in the construct form, we say Sidrei Mishnah.
Or Mishnayot is like short.
Shisha Sidrei Mishnah.
Mishnayot is like a collective.
Mishnayot is plural. One Mishnah, many Mishnayot. Singular and plural, that's all. I want to show you something that you're going to thank me for forever, because it'll help you understand Israeli politics. Israeli politics? So hard to figure out, right? You know that there's a religious party. How do they say religious party? They choose a name which will make you think of something religious. You might have heard of the religious party called Shas. Shas is actually an acronym for Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, the 6 orders of the Mishnah. It's called the Shas. When you study Talmud, you want to be studying the Shas. Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. Shas. They called their political party Shas. Because for anybody who's religious, this is the highlight of religious Torah study, studying the Talmud. Another way for saying the Talmud equals Shas. Because it's a book about the Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. Right? That's what the Mishnah is. That's what the Talmud is. Talmud is equivalent with Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. As we said, the Talmud actually is lacking a little bit of commentary on all of the Mishnah. The Mishnah is complete. The Talmud is only, if you're learning Bavli, it's 37 out of the 63 Masechtot to study in the Gemara.
And the Midrash is more halachic.
So there's 2 types of Midrash, halachic Midrash and Agadic Midrash.
So the Midrash is more halachic, and the Gemara is more, it's a mix of both.
You mean Mishnah?
So you meant Mishnah.
You mean Mishnah. Mishnah is mostly halacha, and the Talmud is about 50-50. The Gemara is about 50-50. But mostly halacha, but of course you see Masechet Avot, which is primarily Agadah. But it's right there, and smack in the middle, number 39 out of the 63. Is that clear? Yafeh me'od. Bezrat Hashem, we will study some words from the Midrash next day when I bring it. So I have all these pages, but for some reason they're not here yet. Maybe I have them here. Okay. Let's, everything else really on the chart is secondary. But you have to realize Tanakh and the writings of the sages. The writing of the sages and the writing of the prophets. Those are the two major books of Judaism. Since then, it's all been, I won't say downhill, but I will say that it's all commentary. After that, what do we have? Period of the Gonim, period of the Rishonim, period of the Acharim, another 1,500 years. We've been writing commentary, we've been discussing the Talmud ever since. No author since Rav Ashi at the end of the Talmudic times, the end of the period of the sages, has the authority of the sages. Not the Gaonim, not the Rishonim, and not the Achronim. We don't have the same authority as the sages. So since then, there's no major book written until today. If I wanted to publish a book about Shabbat, if I wanted to publish a book of Torah scholarship and insights and commentary, my ideas and my teachings and explanations, most of the Torah chidushim, innovations and explanations, they use the structure of the Mishnah and the Gemara. So you'll have a book about Masechet Avot, a book about Masechet Shabbat, a book about Masechet Zvachim, Masechet Kiddushin. If you want to write a book about marriage, you'll write it as a commentary on the Talmud. Everything since then. Perushim. Perushim. You see this? Commentaries. Commentaries primarily on the Talmud. We can also have commentary on the Tanakh. Here we have a commentary on the Tanakh, which is written in recent years. And that's it. We pretty much use that structure of the Talmud until today. 1,500 years, we're still trying to figure it out. And the Tanakh, 3,000 years, we're still trying to figure it out. Writing it, studying it, mining the texts for the pearls of wisdom and inspiration. There's one other genre, there's a few other genres mentioned here. Other books that are written after the Talmud. We spoke about them yesterday briefly. Codes, law codes, right? The Talmud, as we said, is a mix of halacha and agadah. What if I only want to get halacha? So the Rambam wrote me a book of halacha. And what if I only want to get agadah? So there's books of agadah. They're called Sfarim, Sifrei Machshava. You have it here on your chart, the bottom right-hand corner. Sifrei Musar. There's books of ethics. Hey, I happen to have some right here. You see that, Yesharim? There's a book of Musar. Musar is ethics. No, ethics. Not halachic aspects, but more sort of guidance on how to live your life, behavior, proper manners, all those kind of things. You see that Hashem is a classic. Also this one. This is Derech Hashem, both written by the same author in the 18th century. 18th century, which period? Achronim. He wrote books. It's not on the order of the Talmud. It's not a commentary of the Talmud. He collected from different parts of the Talmud and put them together in a cohesive structure for his purpose. This is more philosophical, based on Kabbalah. This one is more ethical in terms of guidance, how to live your life. I give every Wednesday afternoon in my yeshuv where I live, I give a shir on Mesilat Yesharim, on this book. Yes.
The Bible,
Yeah.
this is the second book.
You think this?
No, I don't think.
Oh no! After the Bible, what's the major book? The Talmud. The Talmud. That's what we've been talking about all day. That the Talmud, written by the sages, that's the central book of Judaism after the Tanakh. Okay? And really, until today, People study Tanakh, they write commentaries on Tanakh. When people study Talmud, they write commentaries on Talmud. Some people pull out some halacha from the Talmud, and they write it as a separate book. Sometimes they pull out Agadah. They pull out, I want to focus on the matter of ethics. I want to, pull out a book about Mashiach. I want to write a book about the redemption. So that's a book, which is a separate book. It's not part of any structure. It's not part of the Talmud. Talmud doesn't have a masechet about redemption. But you take writings from the sages. Some writings are going to be in the Midrash Halacha. Some mostly, as I said, Midrash Halacha is very small. We only have 4 little books. Midrash Agadah. If I want to look for words of the sages about redemption, I can find them in the Tanakh. I can find them in the Midrash. I can find them in the Mishnah. I'm going to find them in the Gemara. That's it. Those are the words of the sages. So we're really doing some serious study on the words of the sages until today. Of course, if you look on your chart, there were rabbis who wrote commentaries, who wrote other books afterwards. They don't have the same authority as the sages, the Chachamim, Chazal. Okay, that's really a source text. You can source an idea you have back to the Talmud, back to the Midrash, back to the words of the sages, you're on solid ground. You can say, this is a Jewish teaching. If you can't find any source for it in the Talmud or in the Midrash, you're making stuff up. That's not necessarily a Jewish idea. This was a debate about, till today there's a debate. For example, there's an idea called reincarnation. Very big deal in the Eastern religions. In some versions of Judaism, some rabbis brought, they believe that this is part of Jewish tradition, that someone dies and then the same soul can be reborn in a different body, in another baby. Forget about even being the soul coming back in the body of an animal or in the body of a bird or anything, other stuff like that. This is a tradition which has been around for a long time, and many, many great rabbis, especially the Arizal, he said, sure, this is a Jewish tradition. But there was a great rabbi, Rav Sadia Gaon. Where is he? Sadia Gaon, where am I going to find him? Look, he's even on your page. Sadia. See the word Sadia? That's one of the most famous of the Gaonim. After the Talmud, he wrote a book on Jewish philosophy called Emunot V'Deot, Beliefs and Behavior. And there he writes, reincarnation is not a Jewish belief whatsoever. And he says, find me reincarnation in the Talmud. Find me reincarnation in the Tanakh. If you can't, then you're making stuff up. That's not a Jewish tradition. And he believes, he thinks that this is taken from the other religions and it's not a Jewish tradition. Other rabbis argued with him and they said, it was orally transmitted. We can find, maybe there's a reference to it here in this passage and a reference to it in that passage. And it really became, it's still debated until today, but it's quite popular. It's quite, most people recognize it as it is maybe a belief of Judaism based on the Arizal. The Arizal, 16th century, hundreds of years later. He was such a powerful personality, such a great teacher of Torah, that his words have tremendous impact until today. And therefore, you could say, if you ask me, is reincarnation part of the Jewish tradition? I would say yes. Even though Rav Sadia Gaon said no. How can we argue about it? It's an argument. Is it part of the Talmud? Is it part of the Midrash? Is it in the words of the sages? Do we have a source for it? Is it part of the Tanakh? These are 2 major sources. If it's not there, you're on weak ground. You have weak, you're not really well sourced. Okay? Question? Last question? Somebody wanted to ask? Krishna? Yeah? No? Okay.
No.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
In Kabbalah, we used to discuss the reincarnation.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I said. That Arizal was the greatest teacher of Kabbalah ever. And he believed in reincarnation. He thought it was a Jewish tradition. And so, yeah, Kabbalah speaks about reincarnation a lot. That's a very valid part of Judaism. I'm not going to decide. Greatest rabbis for 1,000 years, right? This is the Gonim. What time is the period of the Gonim? Rav Saadia Gaon was at the end, about year 900. But year 950 even. Now it's 2,000. It's been 1,000 years people have been arguing about reincarnation. I'm going to decide. But it's a lot of Jewish tradition. A lot of great rabbis believes in it. Yeah.
I always had a question. When did Moshe start writing?
Me too. I have the same question. Right? Because
Torah or before that?
it's a good question. Ask me tomorrow. It's a lot to talk about. But it's it says that before he died, he wrote the Torah and he gave it to the Levites. So before he died, for sure. Before that, we're not sure. But it's a good question. Moshe received lots of oral teachings. 40 days and 40 nights.
So was it Hashem or Moshe who decided to start from Bereshit?
Hashem. Hashem told Moshe, begin the Torah from Bereshit Bara Elokim. Moshe didn't make up anything by himself. He did what God told him to do. This is the basic, one of the fundamentals of faith, is that Moshe had very little poetic license, as we say. Anyways, we have to stop here for today. B'ezrat Hashem, to be continued tomorrow. Yashar koach. And I'm going to give you a quiz on everything we studied today.